Their age is on their ID. Their emotional responses belong to someone much younger, and they have no idea. Ask a simple question. Point out a small mistake. Say, "That hurt me," and something changes behind their eyes. The confident adult who was laughing with you a second ago is suddenly gone. In their place is someone smaller, sharper, and strangely afraid. Here's the part almost nobody expects. It isn't always because they don't care. Sometimes it's because some part of them never learned how to survive being wrong. This is the psychology of people who never emotionally grew up. Not villains, not people we can diagnose from across a dinner table. Just adults whose bodies kept aging while one specific skill quietly stayed behind. Emotional maturity was never about how old someone is. It's about capacity, the ability to feel something uncomfortable without immediately making it someone else's job to fix. A mature person can feel jealous, embarrassed, or ashamed, and still find enough distance to say, "I'm having a reaction." And that reaction isn't automatically your fault. Someone who never developed that skill doesn't get that distance. The feeling doesn't pass through them. It becomes them. Picture something ordinary. Two people are splitting up chores for the week. One says gently, "Can you take the trash out earlier next time? It sat out all weekend." A completely reasonable request. But the other person goes quiet, then cold, then defensive, listing every chore they've ever done, every sacrifice they've ever made, as if they're the one on trial. What started as a 2-minute conversation about trash ends with the person who brought it up apologizing for mentioning it at all. That reaction doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from a nervous system that never learned one very specific skill: how to sit with discomfort without turning it into a fight. Inside the brain, emotional threat doesn't get processed like a calm courtroom. It gets processed more like an alarm system. The amygdala helps flag anything that feels threatening, including emotional threats like shame or rejection, while regions in the prefrontal cortex are responsible for slowing that alarm down and choosing a response instead of just becoming it. Researchers at NIMH note that the prefrontal cortex is one of the last parts of the brain to fully mature, often continuing to develop well into a person's 20s. But maturity isn't only biology finishing on schedule. It's practice. And practice usually starts with someone else. A child learns to regulate big feelings by first being regulated by someone calmer. A parent who says, in effect, "You're upset and you're still safe," teaches a nervous system that discomfort is survivable. Over thousands of small moments, that outside calm slowly becomes an inside skill, but not every child gets that. Some grow up where feelings were mocked, punished, or simply too inconvenient to acknowledge. In that kind of home, a child doesn't learn how to process emotion. They learn how to survive it. They learn to be funny before anyone notices they're sad, to get defensive before they can be blamed, to go quiet before someone gets the chance to reject them first. If any of this is starting to feel familiar, either in yourself or someone close to you, this channel exists for exactly these moments, so it might be worth hitting subscribe before we go any further. None of those strategies were ever conscious decisions. They're old survival tools, built by a much younger version of that person, still running in an adult body because nobody ever told the system it was safe to put them down. And here's what surprises most people. Emotional immaturity rarely looks weak. Often it looks like the opposite: confidence, control, certainty. The person who can never apologize doesn't necessarily believe they're perfect. Somewhere underneath, they may believe that being wrong makes them unlovable, so the apology never comes, not because the mistake was large, but because the shame feels enormous. The person who needs to control every conversation isn't usually chasing power. They're often terrified of what happens the moment they lose it. That confusion is exactly what makes these relationships so exhausting for the people around them. You're talking about what happened. They're defending who they believe they are. You say, "That hurt me." They hear, "You're a bad person." You ask for a boundary. They hear, "You're about to abandon me." You ask for basic accountability. They hear a threat to their entire self-image. So the conversation quietly bends. Your pain becomes their injury. Your boundary becomes their betrayal. Your need for honesty becomes proof that you're too sensitive, too much, too hard to please. So you start adjusting, choosing softer words, picking better timing, taking responsibility for feelings that were never yours to carry. without ever deciding to, you become the emotionally steady one in every interaction, holding the memory, the pattern, and the hope that if you explain it just right, this time will be different. There's real research behind why this pattern runs so deep. National data on childhood experiences has found that most adults carry at least one significant adverse experience from growing up, and a meaningful share carry several. That doesn't mean everyone who struggles with this had a difficult childhood, and it doesn't excuse harm in the present, but it helps explain why so many adults are carrying old coping strategies into relationships that actually require something different: the ability to be seen, corrected, and still stay in the room. It also explains why the same trigger can look completely different from one person to the next. For one person, feeling criticized shows up as anger, fast and loud, over almost immediately. For another, the exact same trigger shows up as silence that stretches for days, a slow withdrawal that feels less like conflict and more like disappearing. Both are the same nervous system doing the same job, protecting a much younger version of that person from a feeling that once felt unbearable. The outside behavior looks nothing alike. The engine underneath it is identical. Here's the truth this video keeps circling back to. Emotional immaturity isn't the absence of adulthood. It's an unprocessed strategy from childhood, still steering an adult-sized life. And the person carrying it is not fully choosing it, but they are still responsible for what it does to the people around them. Both of those things can be true at once. Understanding where this comes from can help you stop taking it quite so personally. You can recognize the frightened child underneath someone's defensiveness and still decide calmly that you won't keep absorbing what they're not ready to hold themselves. Compassion without a boundary becomes self-abandonment. Judgment without understanding becomes cruelty. Maturity lives in the space between those two. That space is the pause between feeling something and reacting to it. It's where "I feel embarrassed" doesn't automatically turn into "you humiliated me," where "I feel scared you'll leave" doesn't automatically turn into 3 days of silence. That pause isn't small. That pause is adulthood. And the hopeful part is that this can still be learned. The brain keeps its capacity to change well into adulthood. Patterns built through repetition can be loosened through repetition too, just in the other direction. A person can practice noticing a reaction before obeying it, can learn to apologize without adding a defense onto the end of it, can sit with a hard feeling for 30 seconds longer than instinct wants to allow, but only if they eventually stop asking other people to protect them from every uncomfortable feeling. None of this means every difficult moment with someone means they never grew up emotionally. Everyone gets defensive sometimes. The pattern worth paying attention to is a consistent one, where accountability always feels like an attack, and your feelings only seem to matter when they're easy to hold. Somewhere tonight, someone will bring up something small, watch the other person's face change, and quietly decide it isn't worth saying anything at all. They'll tell themselves they're just keeping the peace. But sometimes what gets called peace is really just loneliness that never got to make its case. So if any part of this felt familiar, you can understand the wound in someone without living inside it. Growing older happens on its own. Growing up is the part that actually takes practice.